In this video tutorial, we're going to continue the videos where we're working with the buyers and the invoices. You have a link in the buyer screen to go to those different screens that we're going to be covering. Let's go ahead and start out by going to the invoice input and editing. This particular screen is actually saved or priority. It's for order invoice input and edit. There is another screen which is called invoice standard print, which consolidates all the information and puts it into a printable version, which can either be saved as a PDF and emailed, or you can take it and print it off on one of your printers. Say, for example, you have an 8.5 by 11 page printer. All you have to do is just go ahead and print it directly from here. One of the things, this is a global field, one of the things you would do with this field is you put your company information at the top and put your logo on this side. These are called global fields, and what that means is that when you create the first one and put the data in it and add your own logo, that information will be provided to all the future invoices or things that have the logo or data in that particular item. The first thing that you'll be seeing here is a buyer data field, and as the buyer, when you're creating the invoice, you would put down here, you would pick from the list, and keep in mind that if you have hundreds and hundreds of buyers, what you would do is type in the first few characters of the actual person's name, like Mary Jones. You would put in MAR, and what will happen is it'll immediately consolidate the data down to all the Marys, where you can pick it, and then you would see Mary Jones, and you would add it by clicking on it to enter it in the field. When you entered in the field, if you added an address, city, state, zip, this information will be automatically filled in on the invoice. There's no typing for you to do. The invoice date is the invoice date drop down that is actually added to the record when you create it, and the invoice number is also added when you create this field or any of these fields in the working document. If you have a ship to address that is different from the address that was selected here, you would go ahead and add what would look like a print label for the address where the person's going, like the address, the city, the state, the zip. That information would go in here, and this could be included with the shipment so that the invoice would cover the items that were shipped. Let's go down here. On this side, there are automatically filled things with the exception of the shipping field. If you have an item where you're going to be shipping it, you would put the dollar value for the shipping that was required. Now I'm going to go back to the standard just for a minute here to start showing you some of the other things that are on this input and editing screen. When you have the shipping included, it'll automatically be added to your sum invoice total and your subtotal, and the taxes will be added not for the shipping because you don't tax shipping, but you would have the shipping afterwards. So this invoice total would show the shipping included here. Keep in mind, as you generate this information here, if you put shipping in, it's going to add it to whatever the invoice total is. So that, say for example, it's $1. This is $30.50, $1. The invoice total is $33.10 with the tax, and the sum paid would be whatever they paid over here in the payment screen, which we're going to show in just a moment. And then the invoice balance is whatever is left over. This is green by showing what is currently paid. And if you go to the report for this area, if there's a balance due, it will show in red on the listing. There is a list view, and you'll see what I'm talking about here. Here's the invoice list view. And on the list view, you'll see that there's a balance on both the orders in here, and then it summarizes them at the bottom of the screen. For whatever records you have in selection that you've used to bring up, for example, you might want to bring up one invoice, or you may want to bring all of them up for the buyer. You can also use the buyer name, the invoice name, and the invoice date. So maybe you want to do a date range. Say there's a group of stuff you want to see for the month that had a status of sold or whatever it might be, and you can use sold on the other screen to bring this up. Now keep in mind, anything that you do on this edit screen over here will automatically, if you do a search, will be on that list view that we just showed you. And let's go ahead and say the next thing here, if you're doing taxes and you have to do taxes on certain items, you would go ahead and set the tax rate on this screen. Now if you're in a state or local area where you're at, county, city, whatever, and say, for example, there's one tax for everything that you sell. But in some states, for example, maybe a shirt or a blouse may not be taxed. What you can do is contact us when we send you the application, and I would ask the question when we sell it, for example, on a cloud or something that's going to be compiled for Windows or Mac, an iPad. You need to let us know that you have a need for a tax line on each individual item, and then we'll sum it differently. But most states do not have individual sum taxes on individual items or not taxed items. But if you do, let me know, and what we'll do is add the extra button within this thing to have the selection for the tax rate. Okay, if you have a record like this and you have data in the actual screen and you're going to close out the balance, or say, for example, we didn't have anything already paid, you would bring up the payment screen, and in this screen it's going to show you individual payments that have been made. If you create one like I did here, and I put in the date the payment was made, the balance that's due, and the amount that was actually paid, it will show you the outstanding balance for that particular thing. So for on layaway, this would be a typical example where you'd have a layaway. If you were doing a out of the store sale where the person's going to walk away with the goods and products, what you would do is go ahead and put the date down. You would put the full balance in the paid amount, and then this would be zero, and then you could obviously pick the different kinds of ways that they paid for it. And if you need to edit this list, send up this and then go ahead and edit it. If there's a balance due, what you do is at the end of putting this information in, go ahead and not put in a date, but put the balance that's due, the payment that's due, which would be coming from this field. It'll automatically add the balance in here, and then when the person comes back in, enter the date from the drop down, add the amount that's paid, for example, the balance, or whatever the next amount of payment would be, and then pick the way it was paid, cash, MasterCard, Visa, check, whatever. Then you can go to the portal if you need to see the portal record. Say you have to delete one of the items here. You can go into this record where it itemizes each record, and then you can say, okay, delete that record by clicking here. Then go back to the edit line, and whatever the row was that you took out, that would be taken off the invoice. Sometimes what happens, you'll have a person where they want to hold or lay away a number of items. Then they come back in and say, well, actually, I don't want that other one anymore. Well, you can go ahead and remove that line from the invoice, and then it would show the correct balances for the items when you remove that row. Over here below, there are a couple of icons. The first one is for a company called UShip. What UShip does, if you're selling things like furniture or large items and the person is, say, a tourist and they want it sent to their home or a business, what you can do is use UShip and go ahead and get the information for the size, cube, and weight for the item you're going to be sending, just like you would do at UPS or any of the other places. Go ahead and click on the icon, bring up the web page, put in that information for the item you're shipping, and you will get a number of bids, and each bid will tell you the carrier that could carry it for you and what the fee would be for that. Now, what you can do, for example, if the person you have here pays for the entire amount, ask them if they have PayPal. And for example, maybe you're not going to give the shipping, you're not going to total the shipping for this thing right away. What you can do is have them pay you for a deposit, where roughly what, maybe actually a little more than it would cost to ship it. And once they give you the PayPal, hold that amount until you actually get the actual shipping fee, and then you can credit them back for whatever is not used. Or if you did a little bit more than is required, you can either keep that or whatever, because they're not going to ask you. If you ask them and you're shipping a large item and say it's $35, and 35 is more than you think it'll be, you can put in the 35, charge them at the time, and then go back, and it's up to you as a store owner to refund the PayPal. If you don't use PayPal, you can always do that by go ahead and contacting them and or emailing or sending them a envelope with a check in it for the balance. It just depends on how you run your business and how you want to approach managing things like that. Square is in here. Now, when you purchase the when you purchase this invoice area in the application, what we're going to do is we're going to assign your Square page to this icon. Or you can just click on it as it is right now, and it'll go to the very first page, landing page on Square. The same thing occurs on PayPal. If you click on this, it'll take you to PayPal and you can log in. Same thing with Square. If you want to do additional icons that'll link right to where you pay or your merchant account or whatever, let us know and we'll go ahead and capture that icon and put it on here and then put the linking URL to take you to that website. Let's take a look at the rest of this over here. We had the list view, we have our typical app map and do action, and we had the standard. We went to the standard print invoice. Clicking this will take you back to the other invoice that we just looked at for input. And then there's a long invoice. The long invoice is kind of unique. It's actually a report. And what happens is you can summarize all the records that you have in here. We'll summarize at the top. Interestingly enough, when you click on, they'll summarize the individual invoice ID number. For example, if you had 30 items on here, and the original standard invoice only has 10 or 12. If you sold a large number of these items, they would still show up over here if they did them on the standard invoice or you did them on the long form. But what it does is it allows you to use this as a report. Say, for example, you sold an item to a specific person or multiple times they've come into your store. You can go in here and you can look up the invoice numbers or the customer's name or whatever. Now watch what happens. Watch up here when I change this. I can click on any field in this area and it's the number 1 ID. If I click in the number 2, watch how it changes the invoice. It now is the 2 invoice. So what it does is when you add that buyer's name and then you click on any field in their buyer record, it's automatically going to shift and put the header on there as far as the header for that particular record, and it's going to show the invoice number for that particular record. It'll still summarize it for the invoice set. Now, if you have multiple invoices, you can do a find or search by doing the do action search. And then I only have a couple records in here, so it's not going to be worthwhile to show you this because I can't do consignor 1. It'll still just come up consignor 1. It's just basically the invoices under consignor 1. So you do a search. You can do a search for the consignor by doing start the search and do buyer by the name. And if you want to do a date range, put in the date range for all invoices within that period of time. And then it'll bring up only those records for that period of time. So for example, in your store after you've been there a year or 6 months or whatever, and you want to go back and see all the invoices for Mr. Smith, for example, and he's consignor ID number 1, I would go over and I would start the search. I'd find number 1 or type in number 1. Or just click number 1, which I can do this and it'll put it in. And then for the item ID, which is very quick, all I'd have to do is put in the item ID if I want to see one specific record. Or I can go up to the buyer, put the buyer name in, or I can put the invoice number in, or any combination of these, and it'll find that record. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and just click up here and put 1 in. Even though it's redundant, it'll still bring up all the ones. So what you want to do is make sure that on the invoice number, it matches whatever the the individual invoice number would match either a consignor or whatever. If you do, say, for example, an invoice number and an ID for the consignor and they don't match, you're going to get an error. And I'm not going to get an error because this is good information. I'll say perform the find, it'll come up. But I want you to know that so that if you do something and it's not right, you're going to know that the item ID doesn't match this particular consignor ID, or it doesn't match the invoice number that you're using. So keep that in mind when you're looking for data on this record. Now, for obvious reasons, you can print this screen. Normally this screen is either in landscape, and you can put it in portrait. The way you would do that is go over to the do action, go down to the print setup, and then change it the way you want. And if you want to shrink it down some so it fits on the piece of paper, just do that. And this works very similarly on the iPad and iPhone when you're printing from those devices. And of course, on those, they're going to have to go to a Wi-Fi printer. Okay. There's also the print. So you can just pick the print. It'll bring up the dialog so you can go out and search for the printer that you have. You can print the number of copies you want to, or print all, or X for a certain from 1 to 2, 1 to 3, whatever, as far as printing them. Now, one of the things that's very important when you use the print, It's for the records that are being browsed, which means this particular record, not the individual line items. If you want to do a current record, the one you're viewing, and you want only that record to print, click Current View. Being browsed will print all the records that you have in the current selection of all the records for all the invoices. And you can pick PDF, and you can say print it and save it as a PDF so you don't have to use paper, and then you have these other options. Now on the iPad, if you're using FN Go, you're going to get similar things but not as many as you would on the desktop. Like I could say HPE print, and or one of these really rare things like mail PDF, I can send it as a mail PDF, meaning I can actually have the invoice print in an email and send it to somebody. So there's a lot of things you can use to do that. You can also save it to the PDF to the cloud if you needed to. And there's just an awful lot of things like save as a PDF. You can just save the screen as a PDF. Keep in mind that when you're doing something like that, you need to make sure that your print setup is correct so that all the items on this area would show. These are already set up to not print, so you won't have to worry about that. They will not show on a printable email. If you just capture the screen and capture this area, it will be fine. If you do a capture of the whole area, it's going to show all these items over here on a capture. So it's important to understand the difference between those. Okay, let's go back to the buyer's information listing. And what I'm going to say in this particular screen, look at the items below the buyer. For example, the buyer data, the buyer listing, the order invoice input that we just went through. You can do the list of invoices. Let's do that. The list of invoices, so you can see that. We can also go down after the list of invoices and go to the invoice payment portal. You can go down to the payment list view, which gives you the payment screen where you see all the different things that are in payments. Now, this is kind of an important screen because, say for example, you want to see all the people who have not paid their bill so far. Well, this is a very good way to see all the individual payment line items for this client and the date that they were on, and you can see that this is, you see the whole thing, like this is the amount that was paid in advance, this is the balance due, and you can do the same thing where you do a search based on a person, and that person would be used in this drop down. You just, when you have all your people, and you can pick by the individual person to summarize all their outstanding invoices. And then you may want to contact that person, so you can just click on the edit to go back to the payment screen, and from the payment screen back to the invoice. So you can navigate just by a little bit of click. Now the next thing I want to show you is the standard invoice. You can go in there, and the last one we're going to cover is we can go to the invoice long form, which is the one we just showed in the report. Now I've covered all the items currently in the application for the different screens. Keep in mind that this is a custom application. And what that means is you have the ability, say for example, if you want a new item to be added to the database and designed for you, I want you to be sure to keep in mind that if you have a compiled version for Windows or Mac, that is not a good thing because it cannot be edited after the base app is sent to you. You need to raise the issue about what items that you think that you want it added to the application, and the best way to do that is to go to our site where there's a detail page, and there's also a directory for the applications. If you're going to be buying the Mac or Windows version, what you want to do is go to that version, click on the videos, these videos that we're looking at here, or go to, because you don't have the app, you're not going to be able to go to the video help unless we set up, for example, on the cloud version. What we can do is we can put you on a 15-day trial for free. And at the end of the 15-day trial, you can have the option to go ahead and continue, add your credit information for how you're going to pay for the app's monthly fee. For the cloud, it's $19.95 a month, and that allows you to use any device, including an Android on a browser, or you can use the iPad with FM Go, and that has a lot of extra utility things that you can do with this app on the iPad and iPhone. Now the iPhone, as you might recognize, might be kind of difficult unless you handle it in landscape in some screens and scroll up and down with your finger to look at the data and add and edit the information that you have on the screen. Ideally, the iPad, if you're going to use a mobile device, is the right item to be using for this. And you have to make the choice if you're going to go to the iCloud, or to the cloud, pardon me, not iCloud, but the cloud, because it's a special server and application that we're going to add on to your desktop application or iPad. You would use this by using the browser on the iPad, on the Mac or Windows, and you can also use an Android device with a browser, and you can use, like I said, FMGo in order to interact with multiple users on the cloud. The other ones, for example, if you're using it on the iPad, you can back up the files and store them on your Mac or Windows. It's very important to back up, like sometime every week, back it up so that if something happened to the records, and say, for example, somebody stole your iPad and you didn't have your data anymore, make sure that you back it up to your desktop. There's a way to do that through iTunes. iTunes is available for Windows and Mac, and what you can do using iTunes, you can go in and go to the app that's either local on your iPad or on the cloud, and you can back it up from there, and that's very important to know about that. Now, the last thing I want to cover is that if you have the ability to want special things in the future, on the iCloud, or on the cloud version, I keep saying iCloud, on the cloud version, we can update and change anything on the app that you want to change. So like in that 15-day trial, if you say you see something you want to change, we can change it. And as soon as it's changed, it's live on the cloud for all the devices that are supported. And we will have to have usernames and passwords for any users that you have using the cloud. So you can pick either one or a number of them, and we'll add that before we install the application on the cloud for you. I think I've covered everything. The last thing I'm going to be covering is that if we come into a situation where there are new things that we want to cover, say users have come in and said that there's a certain video that we'd like to have made, we will add it onto the application. And because the application has the video in this screen, any new videos that we add to the ones that are already currently on the application will show up in the order of which they were added onto the application screen. And now you have the ability to run that particular video, and it might say new tips and tricks that are added to the application, or it might be very specific, saying different ways to run a certain screen or whatever. So, and there's no extra cost for that. If you add any new thing or request any new videos, those are always free as far as the application is concerned. And keep in mind, we use Skype mainly for our tech support, so we can have the ability to chat with you at the same time and have you make modifications, or we can show you our version and show you how a specific thing works on Skype. So Skype is very important. There are other applications out there that allow you to chat, but they cost you money. Skype is free, and it can, even internationally, it's free. So it's a very important thing that you to have so that we can interact with you. And technical support is always free. So don't hesitate to contact us if you have questions. Thank you for taking all the videos.